Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to SUG Egypt second meetup. I'm Mustafa Hanafi, one of the co-organizers at the group. We have Rihab and Ahmed, the other co-organizers. We're very excited this time to have Akshay and Cam joining us to talk about Sitecore composable DXP, what it means to solution architects. And we'll start this session right away with Cam and Akshay introducing themselves and presenting this topic. And then we'll have some time for Q&A after they are done. I pasted the link on this Zoom chat it's a Slido tool where you can add your questions. So please use it so that we can moderate the questions after the presentation. And yeah, this is all. Cam and Akshay, it's all yours.
All right, welcome everyone. So today we'll be presenting a little bit about what it means to be a Sitecore architect in the composable DXP world. We'll also cover a little bit of what it means to be a .NET developer in the composable DXP world as well. My name is Akshay Sura. I've been around Sitecore for a really long time. I'm too old. But yeah, run a bunch of community events and things. So if you need anything in the Sitecore community, just give a shout.
And I'm Kamruz Jaman. I've been in the Sitecore space for a long time, 13 years or so, and Sitecore MVP for the past 10 years. So let's start with composable DXP and what it is. It's obviously a hot topic right now. We're hearing it a lot in our space, especially given in the past few years, Sitecore's been busy buying up a whole bunch of composable related companies, headless companies, commerce, email, personalization. So there's obviously a shift in Sitecore's direction, but there's also a general shift in the marketplace as well. So if we take a look at the traditional systems that we're used to, the monoliths, such as Sitecore and Adobe and all those other traditional CMS systems, they are all-in-one systems. So they will hold your content and your data, and everything around it is built on the platform using the vendor SDKs. And so your code is built into that system and you deploy into the vendor's platform. The presentation is built using the SDKs. There might be a whole bunch of other systems built into that, such as analytics, search, personalization, commerce even. Whereas with a composable DXP systems, these are traditionally separate systems. So you have a system for the content management, you have a different system for the personalization, you have a different system for the commerce, you have another one for the analytics. And then you will build your code off of those systems. And your job is to actually compose and bring all of those systems together into the digital experience platform that you require, hence the term composable DXP. So transitioning to a composable DXP will give you a lot of freedom because you get to pick the exact parts of the system that you need for the requirements of that particular customer and that particular solution at that given moment in time. And Gartner are recommending it as the future-proof way to future-proof your tech stack because of the flexibility.
And going composable doesn't necessarily mean you have to scrap everything and get everything new, right? So it basically means you have to find the best of breed for you, not best of breed for the whole world. So going with Gartner and Forrester, if they say X is best of breed for personalization, for instance, doesn't necessarily mean it'll fit your situation, your org, the amount of money you want to spend, the amount of resources you have. Your best of breed can be different, but the best of breed is for you. It also tells you to reuse what you already have. So if your company already uses an analytics system or a CRM, which you already are ingrained into, everyone uses it, they love it, there's no need to go get something new. And you can do all of this in a very agile way. It doesn't mean you scrap everything and just start brand new. and you choose what you need, but not everything in the world. So if you're not doing personalization at this moment in time on your composable DXP platform, you don't need to look for it, you don't need to get it. But when you're ready for it, then you can start looking for what fits you best if you don't already have it.
The other term we hear quite a lot is Jamstack, and these things are almost used interchangeably in this space. But Jamstack stands for JavaScript, APIs, and markup. And it's a modern pattern of architecture for web development. And the concept behind this is you pre-generate or try to pre-generate as much of your web pages as static HTML. So you can use frameworks like Gatsby, Hugo, or Next.js. Those of you who have been in this web space for a while and may have created your own blogs and stuff may have heard of frameworks such as Jekyll. That's been around for like almost a couple of decades. And the idea is, you have some data and then you just run it through these frameworks and you pre-generate some HTML pages, static HTML files. You then make use of modern APIs. So it may be something from a vendor, a headless CMS vendor or commerce vendor, something like Elasticsearch or a DAM like Cloudinary, or you can build your own. And that will just provide additional data that your page may require, custom data about a user or an account or something. And then you use JavaScript as the glue between both of these. And the JavaScript could be using a framework such as React or Angular, or it could just be plain old-fashioned JavaScript, and use JavaScript to call the APIs and then enhance the data that you already have on the HTML files. So so because it's just plain HTML files, this will allow it to be served very, very quickly. There are some advantages of why you should go to Jamstack.
This is a pretty standard slide, right? We actually saw this when we started all of this in 2018. Oh my God, it's such a boring slide with the same things everyone touts. But the difference for us is we have done it for a while, so we can actually vouch for it. So in the projects we have moved to composable, the cost actually makes a humongous difference. So this isn't just cost in terms of how much the system exactly costs. You have to look at it, what's the run rate for licensing, hosting, deploying, not just for that, like how much does it cost for your developers, the development, the infrastructure, everything from onboarding developers to getting the project to the finish line. So in our world, we have seen the cost be a lot less than the standard like monolith development. Security by default, in the sense that all the previous applications, when you got up to a certain spot like staging or pre-production and production, you used to run security scans. Then you look at the high and the medium, fix it, run security scan again. Same with the performance. But we don't do that anymore. Like the way we have our deployment set, it takes about 2.5 to 3 minutes to go into an environment. We don't look at the deploys unless it fails, and it just works, and it's scalable because it's super fast. One of the super important thing for me, so I haven't, played around with containers way too much in Sitecore, and I'm not the biggest fan. I just think it's a headache, right? So I had the biggest, baddest machine on the planet. It still looks like a kid when you're trying to load all of these containers in and use it. From a developer experience perspective, it actually becomes a lot easier in the sense that from the time you want to set up a developer, it takes about 10 minutes. You pull the repo, do the npm install, get it up and running. It's easy, and within 10 minutes, no matter how bad your machine is. So like sometimes I work on a really old laptop, doesn't make any difference at all. And then from a new developer perspective, since these are all API first, headless first systems, they're documented by default. So they're pretty well documented. They have good support. So anything you need to look up, you don't really have to talk to anyone really. You just look up on their website and the APIs give you pretty much everything you need. So I love like those aspects of it.
Yeah, the documentation on these SaaS systems is great because you can't be using something like .peak that you can with Sitecore because there's there's no libraries, there's no DLLs to decompile. And if you're just starting out on this journey, a lot of these systems have free trials and free developer editions, so you can go and sign up, start playing with the system, start building stuff against the systems. There's a lot of like samples and starter kits that you can use to like get the system up and running and see what it's doing. So that's been great that you don't have to jump through hoops to just be able to get a trial instance up and running, or need a partner license or something like that. So it's been quite a nice fresh air.
Another thing we wanted to mention is one size does not fit all. What does that mean? So unlike traditional systems, if I'm working with a customer, I find a solution based on what the customer has, they don't have, their criteria in terms of financial, in terms of interdepartmental, just looking at what problem we're trying to solve. We'll come up with a stack which includes certain technologies. Doesn't necessarily mean I can take the same stack and put it everywhere. Every situation would need to be reevaluated, but you need to be flexible enough to work with different technologies. But because it's all API first, it's very, very similar. You're not going to see a lot of differences in terms of the ability to do things. But we wanted to mention that one size, like if you figure it out for one project, doesn't mean you use it for every single project.
Yeah, and in terms of features, especially coming from Sitecore, Sitecore is a very, very powerful system, right? There's a lot of features in there. There's a lot of different systems built into this one platform, and if you use it properly, then you can get a lot of benefit from it. But from our experience, not a lot of people are using all of the features like they thought they would do. Like they saw the sales pitch or around like the personalization story, and they thought, oh, wow, we need this. But ends up that most people don't use it. They just end up using Google Analytics for their basic analytics requirements. They maybe have some basic personalization that some developers have put on there, like geolocation-based personalization, or maybe an account-based personalization. But personalization in itself is an ongoing process, right? So it's not like you can just have the development team implement it and that's it, you leave it. It has to be taken quite seriously and followed through. And so we started looking at these systems and breaking it down to say, okay, what are the absolute basics that we would require as our feature list, and then what are the things that we could add on top. And so we started to build up a list of these requirements just internally, and then started to go and look at systems and processes that we could follow to try and match those potential requirements as they would come up.
So what does a Sitecore architect in a composable world mean to me? So this is a very interesting question, a question which you have to step out in order to answer yourself. So the tricky part for this is someone like Kamruz and I, who've been just doing Sitecore for the past 13 to 15 years. We're very pigeonholed into the idea of finding a Sitecore solution to any problem, whether it fits or not. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. And sometimes it's organizational, right? So depending on the companies we work with, people like Avanade or whoever it is, you're like, oh, you're just in a Sitecore group. If you want to use a different technology, it's another group. You have to deal with another group or just find the problem within yourself. So from our mind, we need to think very out of the box solutions to things you don't even know those technologies, by asking people around and saying, hey, by the way, I'm trying to solve this. Has anyone done it? What's your recommendation? Trying to look at decoupled systems and see if they solve your problem without doing a lot of work. So the approach itself has to change a little bit in terms of how you solve problems. It's no longer, one technology fits my problem. You have to look at the problem and find the right technology which solves the problem.
Yeah, if we take a look at what the role of an architect is, so Wikipedia defines it as a software development expert who makes high-level design choices. And so I think with like myself, I know, and Akshay, we've grown up as developers. You know, we've moved along the Sitecore journey for a number of years, and we have tended to end up writing a lot of code. So you know, we'll be involved in the day-to-day code level aspects of the project. But when you look at it, not many architects do this or should be doing this, right? So I'm not sure if it's just a Sitecore problem or if it's an industry-wide problem. Like when you're building your house, you don't get the architect coming in and digging the foundations, right? You'll have particular construction people in to do that specific job because that's what they are experts at. So we really should be asking ourselves as architects is, should we be actively coding on the project? And do we need to know how to do every single piece of the technology that we're using, right? So if we're using, like we've grown up with C# and ASP.NET, should we also need to know React or Next.js or Gatsby inside out? Do I need to know Sitecore JSS inside out? So even within the Sitecore space, there's so many different modules and parts to it, right? So there's JSS, there's EXM, there's marketing automation, there's now Water Cloud and Moosend. So maybe it's actually better just to hire the talent that you need for a particular role, rather than you personally having to know every single piece of that technology. And so I think we need to be on the lookout, also need to be on the lookout for using the best technology for the job and not just using the technology that we know and are most comfortable with. Like for myself, the default would have always been, oh, we have to use ASP.NET and C# because that's what I know. But like with all these frameworks and technologies now, there's much better ones out there to do the job. So hire the talent for the roles and the jobs that you need.
So what we did here is the really standard Sitecore architecture diagrams. They show you that we have a code repo, we have a build system. The build system pushes it out to certain roles, the VMs or app service. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, all we want to do is we want to showcase a site, put it on some CDN, a user accesses it. And it's all pretty much the same. And the actual roles on the server side or how many servers you run are similar or more or less. It doesn't matter. But that's essentially what we're trying to do. And while we're doing that, as people who have done integrations, every Sitecore project comes with a lot of integration to a DAM, a PIM, an external system, maybe some analytics and things like that. So by like most of the projects, and this slide doesn't do it justice, we could add 10 more of the different systems we integrate with. So now if we look at what we integrate within our regular Sitecore projects into the same architecture diagrams, you can see that we have Google Analytics, we have embedded forms, we have maybe we're calling custom API somewhere, we're integrating with PIM stamps. So in my mind, when I'm looking at all of this architecture diagrams with all the external services, there's some of them which actually get triggered on the client side as well, just like an act-on form of an embeddable form or Google Analytics. In my mind, I want to ask Kamruz, like, aren't we already composable then if I'm already doing this?
Well, you kind of are, right? So you're using a bunch of composable services and you get all the benefits of having those composables, but you built it on a monolith. So you're in this kind of hybrid world where you're still having to support the monolith, but you have some of the benefits. So if we take a look at composable DXP and some of the advantages, with the monoliths, you're very web focused, right? But with the composable, it's omnichannel. So that means you can use the data anywhere. So it could be a mobile, it could be the web, it could be a mobile, it could be a games console, it could be out to the point of sale system, whatever. It doesn't care, right? It's just data, and it will give you that data. They all take a headless first and an API based approach. So you're not tied to any particular technology sets. It's just a REST API, very, very lightweight. They take a microservice approach. So they do one thing, very well. and they are typically SaaS cloud-based by default. So you get the advantages of it being scaled, globally scaled, all your updates are done automatically. The system is fully managed. If there's new features that are being released, you'll just get those. If there's any bugs discovered, they will also push those out automatically, or the security on these systems is handled for you, so you don't need to worry about any of that. Because they are an API-based systems, they are technology agnostic. It's just REST APIs. So you can code your solution in anything you like. So it could be a JavaScript-based framework like React or Next.js, or it could be C#, or it could be Java, or it could be PHP. They don't really care. Each of these systems are typically best of breed. They do one thing, and they do one thing very, very well. So they're not trying to be everything. A content management system is just a content management system, and a commerce system is just a commerce system. You can also avoid vendor lock because they're API based. It makes it very easy to get data in, but it also makes it very easy to get data out of these systems as well. So if you need to swap out one system with another one, you can, and it's a lot easier than if you are using the monolith, where you don't have a choice a lot of the times. But because these vendors know how easy it is to get system in and out, they are actually servicing the customers really, really well, because they are scared of losing them. And if you code your systems up using something like GraphQL, it will allow you to structure your data in a kind of fairly agnostic and standardized way. So when you do move those systems out, it's just a very thin layer that you need to rewrite. But also on the vendor lock, you also reduce agency lock as well, because it doesn't have this deep requirement for a specific vendor's SDK. It is just very open REST API systems. It means that you have a wider choice of partner agencies. So replacing partner agencies that are not servicing you well is also a lot easier. So it keeps everybody a little bit more honest, we think, at least anyway. And because of the ease of onboarding new platforms, because they are just SaaS-based, you just need to put down a credit card and then integrate it. It does make it very, very quick to respond to changing business needs as come up. It's a very, very agile approach to development as well, we feel. There are some disadvantages though. So the first one is that they are not web specific. I know on the previous slide I said they're omni-channel, but doesn't matter how we cut it. Majority of the systems these days are still very much geared towards the web and not the omni-channel. There are some specific things that we don't get because it isn't web specific. So most of these systems work like big item buckets, so that like we have in Sitecore. It's just a big bucket of items that you throw data into, and the way you get them out is by using filters and facets. Whereas in Sitecore, we're kind of used to having this tree structure and a hierarchy system, which is very web geared, for because that allows us to have things like URLs and slugs based on those tree structures. Some of the platforms do have that concept. Majority of them do not. Some of them have plugins that you can add in to get that kind of thing back again, or you need to put in a workaround. So just be careful, because that was our first gotcha. It's just this big bucket of items, and it's just not what we were used to working in these systems. There are a lot of different systems out there and a lot of different vendors. It's going to lead to a bit of choice paralysis when you first jump into the composable DXP world. You will fairly quickly, I think, figure out which systems you like and which systems you don't like, and which ones work for your teams and which ones will work for your customers. It's just a fair amount to sift through. But check something like buildyourdxp.com. It'll give you some nice lists of vendors in each particular category. You can kind of then start to narrow it down to the ones that you like. None of these systems provide any out-of-the-box functionality, but having come from the Sitecore world, I think most of us are used to not getting anything out of the box. It would be nice if some of them provided this SXA-like functionality, but it's understandable why, because of this separation of concerns. But they do have samples and starter kits that you can use as a jumping point. Now the systems don't have any dashboards or launch pads like we do on the Sitecore in Sitecore, which can be a bit annoying when you're having multiple different systems. So you have a system for the CMS, you have a system for the commerce, something else for analytics, something else for personalization. So it would be nice, you can DIY something, just a dashboard as a kind of launch pad for going off to the different systems. And finally, the systems, none of the CMSs they don't have visual editors. They all lack visual editors, just because of the way that where the data is stored and how the systems could potentially be implemented.
So then we take a look at the same architecture diagrams with the monoliths taken out. So here we have a headless CMS replaced with whatever the monolith was. And you can see that all of the major systems look the same in terms of integration. We did, so from the code repository, now we're going into Vercel. We use Vercel quite a bit, the enterprise version. It takes care of the hosting, CDN, as well as the deployment. So it makes our life easy a little bit. We're also using quite a bit of serverless functions between everything. So because these are headless functions, we're building them in Next.js. You could build them in pretty much anything nowadays. We do need some automated functionality for deploy hooks, things to be triggered, things to be running in the background. So we use serverless functions. So this is one. If you go to the next one, in the next diagram, we're kind of trying to show you how we replaced it with a headless commerce and a headless CMS. Again, all of the external systems remain the same. In this case, what exactly happened is it saved the customer a ton of duplication and a lot of headache. Originally, they were on a really old version of Sitecore Commerce, Sitecore 8.14. I forget which one it was, but it wasn't good. Anyway, so it was causing a lot of issues in terms of data flows, duplication of information, just media library, and not really using their DAM. They had already had a DAM of their own where they were using print assets, product-based information, and they were already using this. And we just had to reuse it. So some of these systems, we're just using what they already have. And that kind of helped us a lot in deploying this out. And once it gets deployed anyways, and gets on the client browser, all of the client systems, which include Analytics, embedded forms, we used Elastic instead of Solar, and it made life much, much simpler for us. So what we do in terms of approaching composability is we don't look at, all right, they want to take out a CMS, let's put in a CMS in. They want to take out a commerce system, let's put a commerce system. And they want to take out a DAM, let's put another DAM in. We don't approach that way at all. We're very, very technology agnostic. So when we work with a customer, we look at the problems they're facing. Anyone and anything which touches data, which ultimately ends up on a channel, like a website, POS system, or a distribution channel for big warehouses. And then we talk to them about what is it that their main pain point is. So in the previous instance, the pain point was, we have to load it from the SAP, Epicor, and all of that. We have to load it into Sitecore. We wrote a custom program to generate the feeds. We take those feeds, put it in the PIM, and the PIM distributes it to that. So in this scenario, what we did is by taking out Sitecore Commerce from the middle to obstruct the flow, we set up the process so that the data goes directly into the PIM, and the PIM becomes the gold for all products. So as part of these sessions, you work out what the pain points are, and then you figure out if they already have a technology in place, which we can reuse. In this case, we did. And then sometimes you have to look for a different piece of technology to solve the problem, like a headless CMS or a headless commerce system. And then you look at what the customer or the problem needs and you find the best solution, not necessarily the best breed according to the listings or reviews. It's best breed according to your needs. And that has helped us a lot in terms of looking at it from a business problem or a business process problem rather than a technology problem.
So if we take a look at the kind of typical development life cycles, so with cycle development, we take very much a waterfall or a phased approach. So the requirements phase is very, very important still. We'll build out a UX and wireframes, hand that over to a visual design team to create the look and feel and the color scheme. And then it gets handed over to the team to build out the information architecture. A front-end dev team will build out static HTML files, hand those over to the back-end team, who will then implement that and integrate that into the Sitecore code base. And then before go live, the content entry team will work like mad to populate the site and build out the website. And then somewhere way down the line, we'll have this mythical phase 2 that we keep hearing about, where we're going to implement personalization and analytics and goals and triggers and all of those things. But in most of the cases, it never really ends up happening, right? So with the composable development lifecycle, we can actually shorten the entire process because we can do a lot of things in parallel. The requirements phase is still just as important, if not more important. We'll still need to do that UX and the wireframes, but the visual design team can start to build out fairly quickly as well. But when it comes to the actual implementation phase, we can start. The front-end dev team can actually take those visual designs earlier, implement those against the SaaS-based system. So create your content models. The front-end team can immediately start to consume those to build out the front-end site against the SaaS system. The content entry team can be populating the content at the same time, which again benefits the front-end team because they're now using live content and not just lorem ipsum placeholders. And the back-end team can be working on their back-end systems in parallel because they'll be using Azure and Azure Serverless, talking directly to the SaaS system again. So being able to do all of these in parallel makes things happen a lot more quicker. It's a lot more rapid, it's a lot more iterative, it's a lot more agile. And then somewhere down the line, you can start to add the features if and when you actually need them, rather than making your teams, making the solution more complex from the get-go. You can add them as you go along.
Yep, we wanted to talk about this magic word, which is showing up a lot, called content modeling. So if you've been doing Sitecore for a little bit or longer, you know that every time we have a need to store information, we start thinking about templates. We start thinking about template inheritance, standard values. We start looking at how exactly should we store the information in our system. By default, that is basically what content modeling is. The only added caveat to that is part of content modeling is the effort to separate as much as the information as possible to be more reusable and keep the channel specific information to as little as you possibly can. So if you have some attributes you need, which are specific to a mobile app or to your POS system, you have to store them somewhere. So they're not saying don't store it. They're just saying majority of the content, try to keep it agnostic of a channel so it can be reused. So we just wanted to mention that. The other thing which we wanted to go over as well is in terms of visual editors. So I call it page editor. You guys probably call it experience editor. Just because I'm old, I call it page editor. But page editor has a bunch of problems in the sense it's slow, it's this, it's that. But at the same time, it is by far the most powerful web page editor I have ever seen. It's extendable. You can make it very, very complicated and customized based on what the customer needs. You could do a lot of things on the page editor, which you can't do elsewhere. And that's a really neat feature. You're not going to get any of that in the composable world. It's pure and simple. Is the whole concept of a headless composable system is part of being headless is I am omni-channel. I don't know where and how this content is going to get used. So it's really not right for us to expect a headless CMS to actually have a visual editor, because what if I'm using it in a mobile app? Are they going to give me an emulator? What if I'm using in Xbox? Are they going to give me an Xbox? Would be nice, but it's meant to be channel agnostic. But as we know, reality of life is most of us work in majority web, some work in mobile apps too. So there are some systems out there which let you use this from a web perspective. So Builder.io is a good one. StackBit is a really good one. We use Content by Kentico. They have one called Web Spotlight. They have decent UIs, but it doesn't compare with the page editor, nor should it. But you can make do of it. So you still have the concept of using a content editor, but you do have some visual capability.
Yeah, I think so at SuckCon EU, Sitecore announced their future roadmap, especially around this headless space. And one of the things they announced was Sitecore Symphony, which is a Sitecore front end as a service. It's essentially a experience editor like tool, which is built on top of Horizon, and it will allow you to give you that same experience as building out the pages, adding components, setting the data sources, and that kind of stuff. The interesting thing with this is it's being built in a very technology and platform agnostic way. So the example that Sitecore had given is you could be pulling content from Contentful or Kentico by Content or Content Hub, right? Or so that was quite interesting. So I think that's one to watch out for in the visual editor front. They also had a bunch of other announcements around the Sitecore portal for their set of tools as a launchpad, and some other things around authentication and single sign-on and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Sitecore does going forward. But given their history and their past, and I wouldn't be surprised if they come up with some really nice tooling around this. So let's talk about now what it means to be a .NET developer in the composable world. So obviously myself and Akshay, that's where our original background is from. And speaking to people in the community, you keep hearing things like, what is my role going to be going forward? Am I going to be made redundant? Because all you keep hearing about is these composable sites that are written in JavaScript and Next.js and React, and most of us are .NET developers, and can we even do anything with .NET and .NET Core, for example? The first thing to make clear is that Jamstack and composable are not the same thing. You can do one without the other. Jamstack is an architectural pattern for building sites. Composable is pulling together different systems to build out your digital experience platform. But .NET can totally be an integral part of your stack and your solutions. We use it in pretty much all of our composable and Jamstack sites still to this day. And a lot of teams, even in the Sitecore world, are very multi-skilled already. Like, especially if you're doing JSS projects, you have a team that's working on React or Angular or something like that for the front end. You've got another team that's working in the back end that are creating the data resolvers and the custom pipelines and processes and that kind of thing in C#. So we're already used to this way of working, of having these multi-skilled and split teams. The other thing I want to mention is that before we all became very Sitecore specific developers and architects, we were just developers and architects. We would work with whatever platforms you threw at us, and we would build systems. Right, that was what we loved doing, and that's what we continue to love doing. So actually going away from being very just Sitecore specific, you get back to being very technology agnostic, and it will actually open up more job prospects for you, because now you're not just pigeonholed into Sitecore, you're just back to working with technology. So embrace that change. You can also create composable solutions in whatever languages you like. So I mentioned earlier that they just use REST APIs, they're headless systems. So there's lots of examples available in JavaScript, .NET, Java, Ruby. Depending on the vendor, they'll give you a bunch of different examples. And you can build Jamstack sites using .NET Core. There is this framework called Static, which is, take a look at it. This was one of the early ones that we had looked at because it was .NET based. And Static is, so it's a static site generator, right? So it allows you to build Jamstack and HTML pages from data. And the concepts are quite similar to what we're used to in Sitecore. So they have the concept of pipelines and modules, whereas we're used to pipelines and processes in Sitecore. And the idea is you throw some data into the pipeline, it runs through a bunch of modules, and then out pops an HTML file. Now, this was quite interesting, and it worked really, really well for a proof of concept, especially when we had like 10 pages, 20 pages, 50 pages. It was pretty quick. The build times were like, seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. But then what happened is when we put that on top of a headless CMS, especially something with like a commerce system on top of that, those pages went from 50 pages to 200 pages to 2,000 pages to 10,000 pages sometimes. And then what would happen is somebody would go and make a change on the CMS, and then the build time goes from 30 seconds to 2 minutes to 2 hours, because it's got to rebuild every single document before it deploys it. So just be careful with static on this one. That was one of the reasons we ended up going with Next.js. They have the concept of both server-side rendering, so each request is done as it comes in, or the better one is incremental static regeneration. So what this allows you to do is it will allow you to cache, pre-build some pages, and then the other pages will just be created on demand and then cached. So the incremental static regeneration. And so that would allow the very, very quick build times, as well as the benefits of the Jamstack approach and caching and things like that. Now you can create your own .NET Core application, which just will just run per request. You can then layer on a CDN on top of that to cache the pages, so you get this Jamstack-like approach. But you'll then have to add in some custom logic to clear the caches, and then anyone who's worked with Sitecore for any amount of time knows that clearing caches is pretty difficult.
We wanted to talk to the .NET developer in the composable world, so you're not extinct. There's just a manner of being composable in Jamstack. There's still a ton of work to be done. So if you imagine doing your data imports, exports, running deployment hooks, when something gets published in a headless system, you need to clear the cache, you need to index the page, you need to do X, Y, and Z. All of that is done by serverless functions. We tend to use serverless functions based in Azure because we're a .NET shop majority of the time. So we have .NET developers who supplement the front-end devs to do those. But you could pretty much do it in anything you want, right? So if you have Azure Functions or AWS Lambda, you could do it in .NET Core. But you can also write a PowerShell function. You could also write a node-based function. You have a lot of options. But if you are writing a language specific and deploying it to Vercel, Netlify, or Cloudflare, or all other providers, you can write your serverless functions in the same language you're writing your, the code in, which makes a huge bit of difference. So absolutely explore it. use it. Just be mindful that there are service limits for companies like Vercel, Netlify, and Cloudflare. You can't use up a certain amount of bandwidth. You can't use a certain amount of worker process hours. But for Azure and AWS Lambda, it's all based on executions. So you pay, I don't even know, 1,000th of a cent per execution. So it becomes really cheap.
We also wanted to just talk through the different page life cycles for the two different types of models, right? So with the traditional kind of Sitecore world, a request will come in, will get handed over to a Sitecore server. It will then run through all the Sitecore pipelines and processors. It will get the layout. It will grab the renderings. It may then call out to some custom databases, some external services, custom applications, and you generate the HTML, package that up, and then send that to the user. And then the next request comes in and you go through that cycle all over again. With the Jamstack approach, it's slightly different. Because we are pre-generating the HTML, or we're using incremental static regeneration, so it's then cached, every single user will get exactly the same initial response. So they'll just be given an HTML file with whatever they've requested. And that's the reason it's so quick, because there's no processing involved. It's just, hey, here's a request, here's the file, nothing else to be done. What we do though is then we enhance the document by calling out to other systems via REST APIs. So it might be other composable services, or it may be some custom functionality by some Azure serverless functions or some sort of functions. So you call the APIs, the JavaScript will then do something with that response and then render that onto the page. So anyone that's been doing development for a while may be used to this similar kind of concept. So if you worked on a search results page, for example, or an account page, you'll just have an initial blank search results page. You'll then call out to a search endpoint, get the search results, and then render that on page. And then when the user hits the next button, you'll get the next set of results and then render that on the page, and so on and so forth. So the concepts should be quite familiar. They're fairly simple concepts. It's just, you have to pre-generate the markup to begin with. So we're just going to wrap up now, and just wanted to say that in the IT space, the one thing that's guaranteed is change. It's not a case of if, but it's always a case of when. And I think in the Sitecore space, we've been fairly fortunate that the core part of the CMS hasn't changed. I've been in the Sitecore space since Sitecore 6, and that core CMS has changed very little. And what changes have come about, we've been fortunate that we have been growing up with it. So it hasn't felt like a big change. It's just been these very, very small and incremental changes, right? So we went from XSLT to web forms to MVC to now JSS. They introduced systems along the way, such as EXM and XDB and XConnect and marketing automation and things like that. And these have all just been these small incremental changes that we've picked up as each release has come. So with this new technology stack, I think it's important to figure out what is going to work for you and for your teams and for your clients. No one solution is going to be the solution for everybody, right? For every team and for every customer. You have been doing a lot of these concepts all along. You've been integrating these external services. You've been following these Jamstack type concepts for parts of your application. So you just need to pull that knowledge and that experience together, and you'll see how that experience will help you going forward in this composable and Jamstack world. It's very, very important to focus on the client and the project needs. That's really, really going to be the difference of what makes something a success or doesn't make it a success. You won't be able to fall back and say, oh, well, you can't do that in Sitecore anymore, right? Because you get to pick and choose the systems and design the solution as you need it. And obviously, reach out to the community. We are we are all in this journey together. We're all going through the same learning processes and trying to figure out this new way of working as well. So we're always available to at least just bounce some ideas off at the very least. And that's it from us. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, anything else?
There's a few questions.
Yeah. Ahmed, do you want to start moderating the questions, please?
Yeah, sure. So there are 4 questions so far here, and I remind everyone if you want to add a couple of questions here, it's a Slido link. You can find it in the chat here. So the first question. So firstly, thanks guys. Thanks Kamruz and Akshay. It's like I think it's not much clear to me. I personally learned stuff today. The first question: as a developer or solution architect, what are the technologies I should start with and learn to get into the composable DXP world? Actually, I don't know. Like you covered a lot. Maybe the questioner need to get maybe a narrowed vision, like where to start from. And I don't know if they are like an experienced Sitecore developer or someone just starting in the development world. It's like I'd expect you to give us like quick starting point on both, if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, so you have a couple of options, right? We did mention if you wanted to do that, there are SDKs and APIs available for everything, really. Like, so if you want to try it out, you could try it out in a .NET Core app if that's what you feel comfortable with. Nothing stopping you from doing that. If you wanted to explore it a little bit, and some people kind of get iffy when, especially when you're a .NET developer, to look at something like a Next.js. Yes, it is a hard conversion to go there. It is a lot of knowledge you need to gain. But I will say though, once you get into it, it's very easy to just look it up and do it. Kamruz mentioned that they come with their own sampled sites, so you can launch them within minutes, play around with it. They have pre-integrations to some systems already, depending on which system you're using. So it truly depends on the amount of time you have, but you can start with something simple if you're a .NET developer with a .NET Core SDK or dealing with a .NET Core app, talking to the APIs. You're on mute, I think.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So the second question: if a company is already using Sitecore monolithic CMS, how easy is it to switch from the monolithic to the DXP, and how would you measure like how difficult it is, like a page, and what would be your measures to justify the time and the effort needed and the steps to move from XP, DXP, XP to composable XP?
So I'll just start off on this one by saying actually not everybody should or needs to move to a composable approach. For some organizations, for some teams, Sitecore XP is the right platform for them, especially if you put in significant effort into implementing that system and you are actually using Sitecore analytics and the personalization features and everything else, right? If you're using them, then maybe that system is the best one for you. In terms of effort, if it's just from, let's say, an XM to a composable, that's probably the easiest move, because you can grab the data out and then push that in using a bunch of scripts to those systems. The effort will obviously will depend on the organization and how complex their solution is. If you're starting to bolt on things like commerce and personalization and things like that, then it's going to require more and more effort as you go along. It can be quite tricky. So one of the systems that we had moved across took several months before we were able to launch with the first site. But then every additional site after that was launched within a couple of months, and then it was down to the point where it was almost just a few weeks. The first sites are always going to take the longest because it's a big learning curve for everybody, the team, the development teams, and the business as well, because the business will have to reorganize and restructure the way they do some things. And then it will become easier. So unfortunately, it really does depend. There's no straightforward answer. But it is that because all of these headless CMSs and headless systems have these content management type APIs, it is easy to push data into them and script data to go into them.
It depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all right. All right. And the last one here is in this composable architecture. So what are the options to host content, where to host content? And if I'd like to do personalization, what are my options?
So hosting content, I guess, I'm assuming CMS. From that perspective, you'd use any headless CMS vendors. There's so many out there. You have to try it out to see what fits your situation the best, honestly. From an XDB, you're not going to get an XDB-like system. There's others, though, which have similar systems in terms of orchestration as well as personalization. It's a humongous space. There's several providers out there in the composable DXP world. Sitecore Personalized is one of them. You can look into, there's other providers. Again, it truly depends on how far and deep you want to go with these systems. There's Concierge is another one, which is really interesting in terms of orchestration. So there are every problem you're trying to look for an answer. There are a lot of solutions out there. And this is something which isn't just brand new. This has been there for 6 years now, moving all to composable and Jamstack and everything. So there are a lot of players. You come up with a problem. I need a way to do personalization. You'll have vendors. I need a way to do embeddable forms. There's a ton of vendors. It's just, you just have to look.
Yeah, and that's sometimes part of the problem is for some of the solutions, there's a lot of potential vendors, and then you're like, okay, which one do I use? Which one's the best? Which one's gonna? And yeah, there's no answer to that one. You just got to try a few of them and figure out which one is working for you.
Yeah, and that brings us to your point again, that it's important to be around the community. Then you make sure you are not moving alone, and you don't reiterate efforts that someone tried before you. So that's why it's always lovely to be around smart people like you guys and learning from you. Thank you from my side. Thank you very much, and back to you, Mustafa.
All right. I think that's it, really. Thank you, everyone. Again, this is our second meetup at Sitecore User Group. As the presenters and Ahmed said, it's good to be with the community. So our effort here is to try to grow the Sitecore community in Egypt. So there will be more meetups, at least once a month happening. And we're available on the Slack Sitecore community channels, available on LinkedIn. Please reach out if you have any questions to us or the presenters, Kam and Akshay, from today. If you have any topics in mind that you want us to try to bring speakers for the next times, let us know. And thank you, everyone, for your time today. Enjoy your evenings and days, and we'll see you around.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy your evening. Bye. Cheers.